Into the wild I'll go, and into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home. Into the wild I'll go, and into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
Welcome to the Free Birth Society podcast. This is a radical space for women who are ready to celebrate their autonomous choices in birth, motherhood, and beyond. Together, we'll learn about wild birth through personal narrative, we'll explore the politics of birth, and we'll analyze everything that relates to our lives as women from a feminist perspective. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
Today on the show, we have Anastasia from Seattle, Washington. A self-declared recovering people pleaser, Anastasia chose to stay home to birth her child, alone and in the dark. The mantra she carried with her throughout her birth was to whisper to herself, "I die to be reborn. I die to be reborn." And she tells us the gorgeous story of how she brought her child earthside with the support of her ancestors.
You know, I think in terms of natural birth and the home birth of my son, probably a decade ago, I started having just this like waking up period, and it started with a health crisis. So during my healing process, I became aware of, a lot of the lies that were told about the health system and our food system, agriculture, and all that stuff. And when you go down one rabbit hole, you kind of go down many others. And birth was one of them. So I knew before even getting pregnant with my son that I wanted to have a home birth. And I knew the midwives in the area, and it was all planned out in my head. And so when I did get pregnant, I had to go through a whole process of getting my husband on board. He's like the best man in the world. I love him so much, but he's very traditional. And I think that's a big stretch for a lot of people, just because we've been so conditioned to think what we have today is normal. So
plus the irony is that it is traditional to home birth. It's actually quite modern.
I know, right? I know. Isn't that so silly? Yeah. Oh, it's so true. But he did get on board. He totally understands this concept of what feels safest for the mother is the actual safest scenario for her to give birth. So we had that home birth planned and for a long time. And we had one group of midwives in the area that offered home birth. And so there wasn't a lot of options, but I really, really liked the head midwife. She was a beautiful person and an elder. And so I felt really comfortable. But I did go into that birth or that pregnancy knowing that even within the home birth scenario that I'd have to be, fighting for my right to be sovereign in my decision making. But I tell people all the time, I'm like a recovering people pleaser. So I had these great ideas of, avoiding all the testing, and I knew all the dangers of ultrasound. And at the same time, I had a traditional husband who wanted the safest, best thing for me. And then midwives who didn't understand a lot of the science and just my need to be sovereign. But so I ended up butting heads with them a lot. And especially at the end of my pregnancy, the head midwife was out of town. And it might have been exactly the same with her when I think back on it. I'm like, well, maybe if I'd had a different midwife, but I actually think perhaps I would have acquiesced even more because she had that authority,
Yeah.
And so as a woman coming from a family lineage of women who have longer pregnancies, I knew going into it that I might have to butt heads with regards to all the extra stress testing and ultrasounds.
Ugh, that's so stressful.
Yeah. It is, Emily. And like even the ultrasound, I gave into the ultrasound 20 weeks and we found an anomaly with my son. So that led to more ultrasound. So for a woman going in that didn't want anything, it became a very kind of I call it traumatic. I know it's all relative, and some people are like, "Oh, you had a beautiful home birth," but for me, it felt so bad. And at the end, yes, I came up against all that extra testing that had to happen, and I said no to the ultrasound. And I ended up, I think, inducing myself via like nipple stimulation because I just was like desperate to give birth myself before having to be forced to go to a hospital for induction, which they were trying to plan, and have that third ultrasound, which the ultrasounds in themselves for me are traumatic. I hated watching my son squirming around in the video screen and knowing that it was not safe or good and just wondering what he was going through. But all that to say, when we did get to the end, I was just fighting with the midwife who was there to serve me at the end. And she had a lot of fear because I had tested positive for Group B strep. And I think that's probably the main issue that I can think of that caused the most stress, I think, for all of us, because I had done tons of research on it. I'm a product of having grown up in the society. So I'm someone that like gets geeked out about the science and feels I need to back everything up with proof, even though, intuition is just as powerful, if not even, much more powerful in my mind. But you feel like you need that stuff. So I knew that I was definitely not going to take any antibiotics whatsoever during my pregnancy or birth, unless I was dying or had something that was going to actually risk my baby's life. And, because I feel like, sorry, this is maybe too much about the antibiotics, but it's like literally you're dropping an atomic bomb on your system and your baby's system at the very start of their life and at the start of your journey into motherhood. And it just, you get it. It destroys you on a microbial level, but it also destroys you on a spiritual level, I believe. And
especially, I would say the spiritual aspect is like, especially when you don't want it. Like there's that whole, same with the ultrasound, same with all the stuff. Like if you're going in really not wanting it, I do believe like in some degree, whatever you do, it's the energy around you doing it that really dictates how your body and your system perceive it. Right. So if you're like smoking a cigarette with tons of shame, I think that's way worse for you than smoking it, like loving every second of it.
My God.
And I think the same could be true with the antibiotics and with like, yes, there is like objective damage to ultrasound and antibiotics to your system and to the fetus or the baby, but really like, gosh, this whole other layer of what stress it was causing you and that you didn't want these things and feeling, walked over and, God, so stressful.
Yeah, you're so right. And I'm so glad you said that too, because I always catch myself because I'm like, these are my decisions and these are my beliefs based on my understandings. And so, I had a beautiful friend of mine going through the same thing as me in the hospital, taking the antibiotics. And it's not to, shame anybody in their decisions because we all are just making decisions based on our own beliefs and stuff. But yeah, you're right. That just makes it all the worse. So anyway, when I did go into labor, that midwife had a lot of fear. And so there was a timeline. I had to have birth within 18 hours from the time my waters broke, which they broke at the very beginning. And I thought I was progressing perfectly, but she had so much fear. She had me take castor oil. So then I'm on, I don't even know. It didn't do anything. I actually didn't even poop at all during that birth, which is just so fascinating. But so I don't think I needed any, obviously I didn't need castor oil, but anyway, the labor was progressing normally, I think, when I look back on it, other than the fact that I was in a state of fight or flight the whole time.
Yeah, I wouldn't call any of this normal. I mean, you were AROM'd. They broke your bag. They're stressing you out. They're pathologizing your body. You have an attendant who's full of fear. She's giving you toxic shit to drink. Like this is, and the fact that your body could progress in spite of the battle you were in is so mind-blowingly incredible.
You're right. And that's absolutely true. There was nothing normal about it. But right, in terms of the physiological process, something was happening to move me forward. It didn't feel good. And I'm sure it could have felt, and now I know it could have felt a lot better during those first stages. But And then at some point, they just thought it was time for me to push. And if you had asked me like 2 days earlier, I would have been like, I will never let anybody tell me when to push and let my body tell me. But when you're in that state of birth in general or fight or flight and people are telling you what to do, I just walked into the other room. I got in the tub and I started pushing. And I let them tell me where to push and how to push. And I felt like a little lab rat in a pool. Like when I think back on it, it's like really terrible feeling. And I mean, I processed all that, but it's just a bad memory. And then of course my body was in no way ready to push. So they're all looking around like, what's going on here? And telling me that my moans don't sound right.
Wow.
And obviously they didn't sound right because my body was not bearing down. And then I had a swollen lip, and then she gave me a cervical check, which I didn't want any hands in me. And I ended up, the whole rest of my labor was really difficult because then when I did want to bear down, I was told not to bear down because of my swollen lip. And
oh my God.
Yeah,
that was infuriating.
That was the most excruciating part, to not bear down when your body's telling you, it wants to get that baby out. So I spent hours then marching up and down stairs and then lying on my back and in side lies, and lying in a position that your body doesn't want to be in is excruciating. And having their hands up you for an hour trying to push it aside is, so when my son did come, I feel so sad, but I didn't have any of those ooey gooey. I mean, I was so relieved and I was so excited to see him, but I was in a state of shock. And I know that you are in many ways anyway when you have these beautiful births, but it was a bad state of shock. And then I feel like I was this wounded deer kind of pandering to the midwives and not excusing what they did. Like I tore really bad too. So while the woman was stitching me up, I had this conversation with her, which is like, hey, like maybe we needed each other in our lives to kind of push us to the next place. And I didn't know at the time what that was, but I was having this really trying to have this wonderful moment with the midwife, just doing everything I could to create some beauty within that birthing situation. And she's a beautiful person. As a woman, she's lovely. It just, I mean, you guys talk about it all the time, but she's working within the system. So
I mean, yeah, she's a beautiful person that completely ruined your birth and completely humiliated and sabotaged and violated you. Totally beautiful person.
I know if you put it that way, it sounds really shitty, but you're right. And I do have some of those feelings when I think about all that, or I did, and I do still. But yeah, I mean, people are well-intentioned, but they just don't realize how much harm they're causing by doing and saying what they're doing. So yeah, that was pretty bad. And I think she took my temperature at the end and looked at me like, thank God you didn't kill yourself and your baby, because I didn't have a fever. And I think that was one of the worst moments of all too, just being like, wow, just the icing on top of the cake.
Wow.
And I did email them later and tell them about my experience, and I never heard back. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was my son's birth. And I love your most recent post about how to talk to your children about their birth. I think that's going to be so helpful one day when he's old enough to talk about it. But yeah.
So then how does that leave you for that first year of postpartum? And at what point are you like, I'm not doing that again?
I'm so glad you asked, because I wouldn't have told you off the top of my head, but I mean, my first year with my son was so hard. And I don't know how much of it was just his little spirit and who he is meant to be in this life, or how much of it was all the trauma from his pregnancy and his birth. But I think if on anybody else's, allopathic measure, I'm sure they would told me I had postpartum depression. I mean, I had just dread every night, all day. I mean, I was crying. I cried before bed every single night. And it was just fear of taking care of this little being who I loved, but who would not stop crying. I mean, he cried for 24/7 for the first 4-5 months of his life. Didn't sleep.
Oh my God.
And he's the most amazing. I mean, he's just adorable. He's magic now, but that first year was really rough. And then kind of, as you were pointing out earlier, that spiritual reality of having gone through this thing and thinking, I stood up for my rights in some way, but really I didn't set myself up for success, and then kind of feeling like I'm not whole and I'm not as good of a mom as I could have been by protecting him. And, you know, I had to process all of that, which I think that's motherhood probably forever. Even in the afterlife, I'm like, you're probably always going to be processing guilt but for the most part, I feel like I forgive myself. But yeah, that first year was really, really difficult.
So then at what point do you start thinking about your next child and what does it look like to kind of start organizing around doing things so differently?
You know, Emily, I think it's really interesting that you can go through that thing and then think that somehow you're going to find another midwife in a system that's going to help you do something different. And so at the beginning of my next pregnancy, I knew I wanted something so different, but I kept myself within the system at the beginning. I was looking for a midwife. I interviewed, we had a cross-country move. So I'm in a new city now and a lot more options for home birth midwives. And I thought, hey, I'm going to find somebody that is going to let me do whatever the F I want. And I did find someone who was much, much better. I explained to her that I didn't want to do any tests. And she was really cool about it. She's like, your body, your choice. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you what each test does for you and for me. And then you get to decide. At the same time, I know that there is an amount of uncomfortableness for these women in these scenarios who want to give you your choice, but they're also working in the system. And so they have to cover their backs. And so I did know that there were a couple things that she was not willing to budge on. And I knew she wanted to monitor me during the actual birth. And I was not okay with that. And so there was a lot of, what do I do? I don't want that. And I don't want to have a woman in my space that I don't feel is going to respect my needs. And also a woman that I didn't feel spiritually connected with. You know, I don't know how you can, you know, with just one meeting a month become kindred with someone enough that you'd want them to be in your space for birth. But anyway, somehow, you know, I think I manifested it in my life. I knew I didn't want this thing. And somehow the Indie Birth podcast and your podcast came onto my radar. And it was actually through a doula in the area. She was like, ooh, you should probably just look at the Free Birth Society and Indie Birth and check them out. You're going to get really into that and learn a lot from them. And so I found you guys. And I think as soon as I clicked onto your website and I saw you and Yolanda speaking, I was just like, oh, I mean, these women, and what are they? This is amazing. Like, I can't even believe that free birth wasn't something that was in my realm of possibilities. Like to think that women don't know that they can just have a baby. I mean, it's kind of absurd now looking back, but I was just kind of cracked open and I knew right then and there that this is what I was going to do. But of course, you know, trying to get my husband on board with that was it seemed like such a task. And I did download your course, which is amazing. I'm not trying to like sell anything on your podcast or anything, but it's
sell away.
Well, yeah, I guess, yeah, you're right. For your sake, sure, I'll sell away. But for any woman, I mean, think about all the money you spend on these courses when you're
right. That's why we made it.
Why would you not spend your money there? I mean, it's amazing. And all the science is compiled, you know, all that stuff that I'd seen prior, you know, it's all compiled in one place. And it's so much more than that. You know, it's like you're just helping us process all the fear and recondition ourselves, find ourselves again. It's amazing. So that was beautiful. And it helped me have a conversation with my husband. And while it didn't land the way I wanted it to at the beginning, I mean, he gets it. And ultimately at the end of the day, he was the one that was like, okay, you got to cut ties with this midwife who, you know, you keep complaining about going in. I'm like, I'm going in because I think you want me to have the safety net. And I realized, no, you know, I think it was probably me. It was that last step for me to just say, I'm taking this responsibility on for myself. And I think halfway through, I stopped seeing her. And it was silly because I was just going in and talking with her and she took my blood pressure. But she was really cool about it, which is kind of hopeful. She just looked at me and she had to process it for a second, but she was like, wow, that's a really powerful choice to make. And she started tearing up and she gave me a hug, actually. So
you were like, yeah, I would have loved for you to be there, but you didn't respect my sovereignty or my human rights. So
I know. I think there's a part of these women that knows deep down and wants it, but it's hard. It's hard. Yeah. So, but yeah, that was really an empowering choice to do that. And then I was it did feel so wild. It felt like a wild pregnancy. And that in itself was just, that gives you the power, all the power. And
so how pregnant were you when you fired the midwife?
I think 5 months, 6 months, somewhere around there.
Okay. So tell me about the rest of that pregnancy and like, how do you prepare? How do you talk about it or not talk about it? Who do you surround yourself with? Like, what is it like to step into this big decision?
Yeah. Wow. I think that's one of the most important discussions to have because it's a lot of work for us women, at least those of us who are deeply conditioned, who grew up in this mainstream world. I did not tell a soul. My family is beautiful and they're actually all on board for this kind of stuff, but it's a lot for them. I felt it'd be too much for a lot of them to handle at the end of the day. Like they might be on board and like power to you on it, but they might have a lot of fear at the end. So I didn't really tell anybody. I kind of hinted to my mom a little bit and she seemed to think the idea was really neat, but I knew that mothers have fears. So I kept it there. I got her like blessing in a way and then I left it. And then I invited my older sister into my reality because she wanted to be here to support me. She was like, I'm off from work. I can be there. And she's a body worker. So she was like, I can help you in those last stages, tend to your body while you're taking care of your toddler. And so I told her my plan and I shared a lot of your information with her and she geeked out about it. It's like, she loves you guys. So I had this other woman, my blood sister on my team who I could process things with. But if I can go back, I think one of the biggest parts about getting to a place where I was able to free birth was, dealing with fear of death. Because I think that was, for me, and probably for a lot of women, my biggest fear is dying myself and then leaving my child, my toddler and my infant without me as a mom. And which is a really fascinating thing to process, especially because I was doing it during lockdown when we're all processing this on a global level of like, what is death to us? And like, what is the process of death? And do we want to avoid it? What does it mean for us to die in general? There's so many big questions around death that I think we as a society are coming around to looking at. Finally, we've been so divorced from it. So going through that process was really fascinating. And eventually it just took looking death straight in the eye and being like, so what's the worst that could happen? I die. My children are without a mom. And then what is death? And it depends on your belief systems and how you look at it, of course. But for me personally, I was like, I believe death is just a reunion with your creator. And it's probably the most beautiful experiences and rites of passage that we get to partake in as souls and beings. So I think for me, once I just stared at it in the face, I was like, oh, and then also this reality for my children is just a little piece of their eternal life. And so all will be well, Anna, all will be well. And I came to terms with it. And then the lockdown happened and I had to kind of come to terms with that question again. But which is, I don't know if you read that Charles Eisenstein article, The Coronation, but he has that beautiful question, which is, fear of life is actually fear of death. And then he asks the question of, how much of life are we willing to forgo to stay safe? And it's so applicable to free birth, in terms of all that a physiological free birth has to offer you on a physical level in terms of protecting yourself and your baby, but on a spiritual level, and what in terms of what it has to offer you as a woman in this world, and as a soul. And so it was a huge deep dive to be doing free birth during the lockdown. Was intense. Yeah.
And in some ways, thank God that was your plan.
Whoa, I know. Right. Yeah, because then you're processing all these. I mean, I had lots of texts being thrown around from women about, my friend had the baby taken away for 2 weeks. My friend,
just horrible stuff.
Yeah. And that's a lot of fear, because if something did go wrong, I would go to a hospital likely, so that's freaky. But it was,
Okay, so take us to the end of your pregnancy, the beginning of your birth, and however you want to tell that story.
Yeah. Okay. So I carried really long, and
how long?
43 weeks, I believe. Same with my son, around 43 weeks. And at some point I was like, okay, it's time to come out. And it was, the next morning was going to be Greek Easter, and my husband's Greek, and I grew up in a Christian and Greek Orthodox home. And while my spirituality isn't contained within that necessarily, it's a beautiful story, the resurrection, and my name means resurrection, and my son has the same name as me, male version. His name means resurrection. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to have another resurrection baby just coming on Easter. and the night before Easter, I was just like, I think I just need to go for a walk. It was about 10 p.m. and I went out for a late night walk, and sure enough, I started having some sensations that felt like more than what I'd been experiencing the prior weeks. And I went home, and I just was very quiet. My husband was asleep on the couch. He fell asleep doing work, and I was like, "Ooh, perfect!" Because my plan was to give birth alone in a dark room, just me and the universe, and I got that. So my sister was downstairs sleeping. My husband was on the couch, and I just quietly set my birthing basket out in the hallway, and I lit my birth candle that my sister made for me at my altar. And I turned on some beautiful, ethereal meditation music. And I just was so curious, what's going to happen? This is so exciting. And I thought I was going to have another long labor. So I just crawled into bed with a candle and listening to music. And I just let the process begin. And I think my birth, I would map it out in different pieces. And that first piece was just me in bed. And it was, I'm always curious about what does it mean to have an orgasmic birth or a sensual birth. And while I wasn't orgasming or anything, it was so sensual. And at the beginning, you can really allow yourself to just feel the sensations, because it's not intense yet. So it was just this really sensual time in bed with myself, just totally present to my bodily sensations. And I really got a sense for what maybe women are talking about when they have those experiences or those feelings in birth. So that was really special, because I think just getting present in itself was new for me. That was not at all a part of my last birth, being present to my body. Can you believe it? But then as things started to get intense, it started to be a little more, I hear women saying psychedelic, and it's interesting because I want to use that word, in a way. I started feeling like I was connecting to some other realm or world. And I started talking to some women in my life who had been deceased, who had recently died, my godmother and my yaya. And there was this beautiful moment where I'm talking to them, and I just felt them there with me. And we just kind of there was nothing wrong in our relationships in this life, but there was a need to connect on some level around some stuff. And we had that moment, and it was really special. And special to know that I had people or souls there with me doing this birth. And then after I spoke with them, then I started having this vision of an ancestor that I've never met. And it's so interesting, Emily, because I've always wanted to be really connected with my intuition and my spirituality. And I talk about it and I'm like on this journey, but I would never consider myself like as someone who has great access to that. But in birth, I felt like, oh, here it is. I have it. And I saw this ancestor that I've kind of always had this inkling of a relationship with all my life. And she revealed herself visually, and there she was this like beautiful blonde bombshell herbalist, someone, I don't know. She was standing on a hill and the wind was blowing through her hair, and I saw her, and I believe she's from my grandmother's side. That was really, really neat, because I've always had this connection with that side and not really known what it was. And there she was. And that was really powerful. Again, just to be like, oh, I'm not alone right now. We're all doing this together. And then things started to get really intense. And that's where I moved out of the bed and I started having to move my body, and the music was playing. It was gorgeous. And I think for me, it wasn't a spiraling movement. It was more like a figure 8, like a infinity sign back and forth, which now looking at it, I'm like, well, how synchronistic, it's the cycle, the never ending cycle of life and death and rebirth and resurrection. And so that movement was so important during this birth. And I had this huge window to the stars in my bedroom. And so just had the sky and the music and my flickering candle that felt like total strobe light. It's like, it did feel kind of otherworldly. And we just danced and it started to get really intense. And, it's funny is again, this theme coming in, which was like, I did not have this mantra in my mind going into it, but my mantra ended up being like, basically, I died to be reborn. And that sounds so intense, but it really feels like that. You're like, this is such a strong sensation. And every time it comes on, I'm like dying a little bit, because I know what's on the other side of this. Not only am I going to meet my baby, I'm going to meet myself. And so it was just that I died to be reborn. I died to be reborn. I died to be reborn. I died to this life. I died to myself. And
wow.
Yeah, that was just cool. Thinking back on it and seeing how all these things kind of fell into place. And then it gets to the point where I'm like, oh, I think I have a bowel movement. And I go to the bathroom, and it was just transition. Now looking back on it, it was just so intense. And that's when I think my husband woke up. I think he heard me, because that was the first time I started vocalizing. I just couldn't not. And for me, transition kind of took me out of that otherworldly zone. And I'm just like, oh my God, this sucks. That every woman, or not every woman, but lots of women have that experience. So my husband comes in, and then he's there. And I don't know, when you have a witness, especially your husband, I think I'm also an actress. So I think there's just a little bit more drama, just because it's fun, maybe, if you can call it that. So I started swearing and being like, this is terrible, and remind me never to have a baby again. And, all those things that come up. But that was not very long. At some point, I just started feeling the urge to bear down. I was like, oh, wow. So I think 15 minutes in transition. And I walked into the bedroom and I just leaned over the bed, and he had no idea what was going on. He was like totally out of it, tired. And I think he left to just like go to the bathroom or something. He thought we'd have like 8 more hours of labor. And so I'm just in the bedroom now, like roaring. And I think that's my favorite part of the birth. It's just like, it's imminent, baby's coming. You can't help but just release your body, like release all the pain of, I don't know, it felt to me like I was just like completing this huge cycle of emotion in terms of just like all the crap that's in me from my life, from my mom's life, from everybody. It was just like this huge completion of emotion in terms of just like, here it is, universe. I am like letting it all out. And the stars were there with me. And I was totally on another, that was like, I felt like totally not here. It was just it was nuts. And my little son's like 10 feet away, worst sleeper, slept right through it. And that was kind of interesting. But so I'm roaring and roaring. And then suddenly I'm like, where is the baby? I reach up and I don't feel anything. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she has to be, or he, or whoever it is, has to be close. And then of course I felt it. I felt my whole body just crack open, and I felt baby descend. And I know I've heard women speak about this moment, and it was so fabulous to experience it and be present to it. But you just really, you feel the baby coming down and you're like, this is it. And, she started coming out. It was not a head. It was, it felt like the sack, and my waters hadn't broken yet. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is not her yet, but something's coming out. And it was like two big urges. And then she came out, this jelly bean in call, or that's what I thought. It was so dark, and I was just using my hands to catch her. And then when I lifted her up, there was a big splash, and there she was. And she just looked at me. There was no crying. She just looked at me wide-eyed, and then she cooed. It was so just sweet. And that's her personality. She's just a sweetheart. It was just a little like, oh. And then the first thing I did was I swiped down by her yoni, because I wanted to know if it was a boy or a girl. And it was a girl, obviously. And that was a really special moment, because I can say all I want that I was excited for a boy or a girl, but I really, really, really wanted to bring a woman into this world. And so there she was, and I climbed into bed, and man, to not have anybody in your space after a baby's born, talking to my husband about it, that was the best thing for him. It was like, we just got to experience her and each other, and it was so sacred and special and
like whole.
Yeah.
So what about the placenta? Do you remember?
Yeah, the placenta, both times my placenta came almost immediately, which was helpful because the sensations are hard to handle when you're trying to connect with baby. And but the placenta came out whole and beautifully. And I did have a lot more bleeding this time than last time, but I was in such faith, and the days following, I had some kind of like fear that I had to process around bleeding and tearing, which I actually did not tear at all. I had a lot of fear that my scar tissue down there was just going to break open, and there was absolutely no tear this time, and no pain, no, my last birth, I couldn't walk or sit up for like 6 weeks because something prolapsed, or I actually don't even know, but this was whole physically, spiritually, mentally. It was just so wonderful. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So how do you feel like this experience has shaped you as a woman?
I keep, like, when people ask me about it, I have this image in my head, and Alex Gray, he's that artist. I know, because you've posted one of his pictures that I love, which is that picture of the woman giving birth. And it's fascinating because when I was manifesting or dreaming up my birth, I was looking at that picture and I'm like, this is what I want. I want this spiritual, I want to connect with the divine. I want to come home to myself. And okay, so in that picture, what I was envisioning prior to birth is that the universe is coming into me and using me as a vessel. And it's this way in which I'm just opening myself up to be connected with the universe. And what I actually felt in birth was that the sensations and the power started from in my womb, and it worked itself up through my body, out of my throat instead of in through my throat. And I think it's a perfect illustration, because it's like, what did this free birth give me? Instead of looking outside of myself for the answers, for the power, it's like, no, it's like the divine is in you already. It's right there. And the whole process is of this free birth is that it reminds you of that you are divine, that you hold the divine spirit in you, you hold the power, you are sovereign. And so I think that that's what it gave me, is it's like this huge, I said it already, but coming home to myself and realization of who I get to be in this life, and that I am a sovereign individual, and
that the only journey is the journey inwards. There really is no outward journey. Like, it all is a journey of coming home to our God consciousness, our divinity.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And imagine, like, you guys say it all the time, peace on earth begins with birth, but like, imagine if every woman could have that realization, and then every child is born to a woman who has that realization. Or it's really big, Emily. I mean, I feel like so much love for you and all the women in your community, because it's just been the biggest gift, and it transcends just birth and mothering. It's kind of become a part of every aspect of my life, and it's really huge.
Yeah, it is really huge, and it's for us to like you just said, to imagine a world and a generation born to a world of women who experience transformative, life and death and rebirth and everything you just spoke about. I mean, that is the vision. And the more women that can hold that prayer and be willing to actualize it, like it's like the origin of change. It's the most impactful, quickest way to shape a world we want to live in and that we want to leave. So I'm so grateful that you're a part of it, and that you get it, and that you're carrying it on in your own life and in your own family. It's really everything.
And just to reiterate what you just said, it's like, it's as simple as that. It's like just giving birth the way you were made to give birth. Like, it's just that is the way in for all of us women, if that's what we choose, if that's the path that we choose to get there. But
especially if the way that we're made to give birth is also the way we want to give birth, to then do that. Because so many women, are like, I want a natural birth, and then they go to the hospital or they C-section everybody, and just it's out of congruence with what they're saying. And I know it's complex, and it's not really to place blame anywhere. It's just
oh no, of course not.
It's a whole nother layer to really understand this, and then actually be willing to go against the grain and carve a new path that is for you and for your family and for the world in such a holistic way.
Yes. And you guys are all the women out there they're doing this work in a public way, like you guys are. It's like, you're making that become a reality, because so many of us don't even know that it's an option. It's like you said, there's no blame on anybody, because it's like, women just don't know. It's that
we've been totally hypnotized. We've been totally, instinct injured, as Sister Morningstar says. And it is the journey of coming home. I always use the image of a lighthouse, because that's really what it feels like. And that when we are turned on to this, it really is our responsibility to discharge, this light and to help bring women home.
Yeah.
And it's totally happening. And I mean, even this podcast, like, this was kind of the start of it all. And it's so fun now to be in our 4th season, because now we have so many stories of women on the podcast who it was the podcast that brought them into it. So it's like this beautiful cyclical experience. And I mean, I always think about the moment it occurred to me that I could just birth, and how, like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so, for all the women who are willing to speak about this publicly and take the social risk, and to do this work in the world, and to even just talk about it, it's I mean, we just can't afford not to, because we're seeing globally women be so turned on by it, and then make these incredible transformations in their life.
Yeah. And it is a risk, or it feels risky. And it is, I don't have the words, but I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful that women are speaking up about it. It's like, because it does feel like such a, it can feel like a judgment on women when that's not the choice that they made, or if they didn't know about it in time. And it's like, we need more women to just let go of the fear of not pleasing everybody else. I spent my entire life doing that. And so I'm so happy to be speaking with you, Emily. And it's really neat to share a good, beautiful story, because I feel like a lot of us women have this tendency to just hide the beauty in our life because it is affronting for people who haven't experienced that. And I'm done with that. I'm done with that. And I see so many beautiful women who have not had that experience upholding this story, upholding this work. And those are the women that I'm like, wow, you are amazing. You didn't even get the chance to do this thing, but you're shining a light on it. Like, that is power, you know?
Yeah. And it's collective healing, you know, and we all have our different paths to walk and our different timing of things. And really it's, you know, everyone has their role to play. And so a woman speaking out about her traumatic birth that doesn't get to walk through these gates again, you know, there's a really powerful story there to be shared and held and healed, you know, and then yeah, I mean, it's just collective. It's all, you know, birth and power, heal the world.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Emily, and all of you guys. Said it 10 times already. I love you guys so much. It's really good work you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm really proud of you and the gift you gave your family.
Thanks. Thanks so much.
And that's it for today, my sisters. Check out everything we do, including one-on-one and group coaching, learn about our private membership, in-person retreats, and more on freebirthsociety.com. Our online courses are on freebirthsocietycourses.com, including our flagship course, The Complete Guide to Free Birth. Don't miss the Radical Birthkeeper School if you're ready to become the authentic midwife that women are searching for. Together we rise, and the revolution starts inside each of us. I'll leave you with our Free Birth Society theme song, Wild Woman by Aruba Red.
I honor you for the wisdom you held, the ancient traditions of plant medicine and womb magic. I feel the spirit of the ancestors as I place my hands upon my belly. This sacred portal will be honored. Eons upon light beams of survival, withstanding the eradication of our power by design. I will not allow the separation of our young to be forced upon me. My sisters will no longer birth in captivity. The picket line redefined from burning our wild women to paralyzing us and drugging our babes. Strapped down in a clinical white bed, drying up the milk from our breasts. Keep your needles. My family will never again be doomed to chase those dragons or your poison. We reject your fear. We choose love. Everything with intention. Death, ascension. I will fly and bring her back from the stars. Conscious